Her mother smiled politely before saying, "You're a nice young man. Just not the kind of future we imagined for our daughter." I thanked her for dinner and never returned. One unexpected reunion changed everything they thought they knew about the quiet man who had once sat at their kitchen table. Margaret Whitfield set her wine glass down so carefully it didn't even make a sound against the tablecloth, which was somehow worse than if she'd slammed it. "You're a nice young man," she said, smiling the way people smile in photographs they don't want taken. "Just not the kind of future we imagined for our daughter." Nobody at that table looked at me. Elena stared at her plate like the chicken had become suddenly fascinating. Her father cleared his throat and reached for the breadbasket that didn't need reaching for. I finished my glass of water. I folded my napkin the way my mother taught me, into a neat rectangle, and set it beside my plate. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Whitfield," I said. "It was really good." Then I stood up, said good night to everyone individually, and walked out through their front door into a warm Nashville evening that smelled like somebody's neighbor was grilling. I never went back to that house again. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. 3 years later, I was standing in a conference room on the 9th floor of a building I used to walk past on my lunch break, wondering if I could afford to eat there, when the woman running the vendor presentation looked up from her laptop and went completely still. It was Elena. I want to tell you, I felt triumphant. I didn't. My first thought, the honest one, was that her hair was shorter now, and she still had that habit of touching her collarbone when she was nervous. But that part comes later. First, you should know how a Tuesday dinner with green beans and a polite rejection turned into the kind of story her mother still doesn't fully understand. I grew up in Antioch, on the east side of Nashville, in a brick ranch house my dad bought in 1994 and never once talked about refinancing. My mother worked at a pediatric dental office for 26 years. My father drove a delivery route for a regional beverage distributor until his knees gave out, and then he worked the warehouse floor instead, because that's what you did. Nobody in my family had ever been to law school. Nobody had a lake house. When I was a kid, a good week meant Fazoli's for dinner and nobody arguing about money at the table. I met Elena Whitfield at a coffee shop near Vanderbilt in the fall I turned 26. I told myself none of that mattered. For a long time, it didn't. Not really. Not on the nights we split a $12 pizza on my apartment floor because neither of us wanted to get up. Not during the 2 a.m. conversations about nothing. Not when she introduced me to her law school study group as my boyfriend. He actually fixes things, like real things, with his hands, half proud and half like she was translating me for people who might not understand the concept. The first crack showed up on a Thursday in March, almost a year in. We were at a friend's engagement party, and somebody asked what I did. "Ethan works in facilities," Elena said, before I could answer. "Not maintenance. Facilities." I didn't say anything at the time. I just noticed it. That's usually how the important stuff arrives. Quiet, wearing a disguise, easy to let pass. Pressure has a way of arriving from directions you don't expect. Elena's mother started hosting what she called family dinners, which really meant interviews with better lighting. The first one, I wore a blazer I'd bought specifically for the occasion. Margaret Whitfield asked me questions about my 5-year plan, the way someone asks a job candidate about their weaknesses. "I want to move into operations management eventually," I told her. "Maybe run a plant someday." "That's ambitious," she said, in a way that made it sound like the opposite of a compliment. Elena squeezed my hand under the table. Later, in the car, she apologized for her mother. "She's just protective," she said. "She had a whole plan for my life before I was even born." "Does the plan include me?" I asked, half joking. She didn't answer right away. She looked out the window at the passing streetlights instead, and I remember thinking that the silence lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. Over the following months, small disappointments started collecting like loose change at the bottom of a bag, the kind you don't notice until you go to count it and realize how much has accumulated. She canceled 2 dinners for study group sessions that could have happened another night. I missed her law school orientation because a production line went down and I was the only maintenance tech on shift who could fix the conveyor motor before the whole plant lost a day of output. She said she understood. Her face said something a little different. We started having the same argument in different clothing. It was never about the actual thing, the canceled dinner, the missed event. It was about what those things meant, about whose time counted as real time, whose work counted as real work. "I'm not saying your job doesn't matter," she told me once, after I'd worked a Saturday shift covering for a co-worker's family emergency. "I'm just saying I don't know if it's forever, you know? Like, is this the plan? Or is this just where you are right now? I remember standing in my kitchen holding a beer I didn't really want, trying to figure out how to answer a question that felt like it had a trapdoor built into it. I like fixing things, I said finally. I like knowing a whole building runs because of decisions I make. Maybe someday that's a bigger building. I don't need it to be some corner office. I just need it to be mine. She nodded like she'd heard me, but her eyes had already moved to something on her phone. The dinner with her parents, the one that ended everything, though nobody said the word ending out loud that night, happened on a Tuesday in October, 18 months into us. Elena had been quieter than usual all week. I found out later she'd already had the conversation with her mother once before, in private, and her mother had said almost exactly what she said to my face at that table, except without an audience and without a smile. Dinner started normal enough. Roasted chicken, green beans almondine, a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my car payment. Elena's father asked about my work in the polite, distracted way people ask questions they don't plan to remember the answers to. I talked about a new automation system we were installing, how it would cut downtime by almost a third. Nobody at the table seemed interested in downtime. Then Margaret Whitfield set down her fork, folded her hands, and said the thing she'd clearly been building toward all evening. "Ethan, I want you to know we think you're a lovely person," she began. And I remember thinking, here it comes, before I even fully understood what it was. "You're a nice young man," she said next, and smiled that photograph smile. "Just not the kind of future we imagined for our daughter." The room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when everyone already knew what was coming except one person. I looked at Elena. She was looking at her plate. "I want to tell you, I said something memorable." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't ask Elena to say something, though some small, humiliated part of me wanted her to. I just felt something settle in my chest, heavy and final, like a door closing somewhere down a long hallway. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Whitfield," I said. "It was really good." I stood, said good night to her father, said good night to Elena's younger brother, who looked almost as uncomfortable as I felt, and walked out. Elena caught me in the driveway. "Ethan, wait." She didn't mean. She meant exactly what she said. I told her. My voice didn't shake, which surprised me. "The question is whether you agree with her." Elena didn't answer. Not with words. She just stood there under the porch light with her arms crossed, and that silence answered for her. I drove home with the radio off. I don't remember most of that drive. I remember pulling into my apartment complex and sitting in the parked car for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The weeks after are a blur of small, ordinary humiliations. Deleting her contact felt too dramatic, so instead I just stopped opening our text thread. It sat there for 6 days before she finally texted, "I'm sorry about my mom. Can we talk?" I looked at that message for a long time. Then I typed, "I don't think there's anything left to talk about," and deleted it 3 times before I finally sent something shorter. "I think you already know how you feel. I'm not going to keep asking you to figure it out." She didn't respond to that. I don't know if she was hurt or relieved. Probably both. My roommate at the time, a guy named Marcus I'd known since high school, didn't ask a lot of questions. He just showed up with a case of beer on a Friday night and let me not talk about it for exactly as long as I needed to. "You know what's messed up," he said eventually, halfway through his second can, "is that you probably would have married her." "Probably," I said. "And her mom just, vetoed it? Over dinner? Like she's rejecting a loan application?" "You've basically been doing half her job for a year already," Gary said. "Every time something breaks, you're the one who actually knows why. Might as well get paid for it." I applied. I didn't expect to get it. There was a guy from the corporate office, a guy with an actual degree in industrial engineering, who also wanted it. For 2 weeks I assumed I wouldn't hear back, and honestly, some part of me had already made peace with staying exactly where I was, doing exactly what I'd always done. Then Denise called me into her office on a Thursday morning and told me the job was mine. I remember standing in the break room afterward, alone, holding a cup of bad coffee, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks, not happiness exactly, more like the sensation of a held breath finally being let out. I called my mother that night. She cried a little, which embarrassed us both. "Your dad worked in a warehouse for 30 years, she said. "You're about to run one." He would have liked hearing that. My father had passed 2 years earlier. I didn't say much back to her. I just let the quiet sit on the phone line for a second, the good kind of quiet. The promotion changed my schedule before it changed anything else. Longer hours at first, more responsibility, more decisions that used to belong to somebody else now belonging to me. I started reading about lean manufacturing on my lunch breaks instead of scrolling through my phone. I signed up for a night class at a community college, not because I needed a degree to keep the job, but because I wanted to actually understand the theory behind what I'd been doing on instinct for years. Marcus noticed before I did. "You've been different since the promotion," he said one night, watching me review some spreadsheet on my laptop instead of half watching a game with him like usual. "Different how?" "I don't know. Less like you're waiting for something. More like you're building something." I didn't have a good response to that, but it stuck with me. The setback came about 4 months in. I'd pushed for a change to our preventive maintenance schedule, a whole new system, more efficient on paper, that I'd spent weeks designing. It failed spectacularly the first month, a communication breakdown between shifts that led to a line going down for almost 11 hours, which in manufacturing terms is close to catastrophic. Denise, calling from Memphis, was diplomatic about it, but I could hear the disappointment underneath the diplomacy. "Everybody makes mistakes with a new system," she said. "Just fix the gaps and don't let it happen twice." I spent that weekend at the plant, mostly alone, walking the floor, rewriting the handoff procedures between shifts, talking to the guys who actually ran the machines instead of just consulting the manuals. I asked questions I probably should have asked before rolling the system out in the first place. It worked eventually, not overnight. Over about 6 weeks, the numbers started improving, downtime dropping, the kind of quiet, unglamorous progress that never gets celebrated with anything bigger than a nod from your boss. But that matters more than almost anything flashy. Somewhere in that stretch of long days and small failures and slower successes, I stopped thinking about Elena every single morning when I woke up. It happened gradually enough that I couldn't point to the exact day it started. I started dating a little, not seriously, mostly to prove to myself I could. There was a woman named Priya from the community college class, sharp and funny, who I went out with 4 or 5 times before we both realized we made better study partners than anything else. There was a wedding date situation with a co-worker's cousin that ended with both of us laughing about how badly it wasn't working out. Nothing that lasted, but nothing that hurt either, which felt like its own kind of progress. About a year after the dinner, I got a call from a guy named Trevor Yu, who ran a small logistics consulting firm out of a converted warehouse space downtown. He'd heard about the turnaround at our plant through a mutual contact and wanted to know if I'd be interested in consulting on the side, helping smaller manufacturers set up the kind of preventive systems I'd built. I said yes before I'd fully thought it through. It started as 1 project on weekends, then 2. Within 8 months, I was doing enough consulting work that Trevor offered me a formal partnership. Not equity yet, but a real role, with my name on the door eventually if things kept going the way they were going. I didn't quit my job at the plant right away. I wasn't interested in some dramatic leap off a cliff. I worked both for almost a year, tired most nights, but tired in the way that felt like it was building towards something instead of just draining me. By the time I finally left the plant to go full-time with Trevor, almost 2 years had passed since that dinner. I wasn't rich. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy to tell this story like some overnight transformation, and it wasn't that. I made enough to move into a decent 1-bedroom apartment near Germantown, enough to not check my bank account with dread before buying groceries, enough to feel, for the first time in my adult life, like the ground under me was mine and not borrowed. What changed more than the money was something harder to explain. I stopped waiting for someone else's approval before deciding whether my life counted as a real life. The reunion happened by accident, the way most important things seem to. Trevor's firm had landed a contract pitch with a mid-sized regional hospital network, helping streamline their equipment maintenance and supply logistics. Unglamorous work, the kind that saves millions of dollars nobody outside the industry ever hears about. I was there because I'd built the framework we were pitching. The meeting was on the 9th floor of an office building downtown, the same building I used to walk past on lunch breaks from the plant, wondering what kind of person got to work somewhere like that. I was setting up my laptop when the door opened and the woman running point for the hospital system's legal and compliance team walked in. It was Elena. She stopped in the doorway for a second, just a second, long enough that I noticed. Then she recovered, the way people trained for courtrooms recover, and extended her hand like we'd never met. "Elena Whitfield," she said. "I handle contracts and compliance for the network." "Ethan Cole," I said, shaking her hand. "I'm consulting on the operations side." If anyone else in that room noticed anything strange, they didn't show it. The meeting went the way meetings go: slides, projections, questions about implementation timelines. I answered the technical questions. Elena asked sharp, Precise questions about liability and vendor accountability. Questions that made it clear she was good at her job, genuinely good, not just occupying a title her father's connections had handed her. Afterward, in the hallway, she caught up to me by the elevator. "You look different," she said. "It's been 3 years. I mean it in a good way." She glanced down for a second, that same old habit of touching her collarbone when she felt exposed. "Trevor Hughes firm. That's yours?" "Partly yours." "Partly," I said. "We're still growing it. I heard about the plant turnaround. A friend from the industry mentioned it a while back. I didn't put it together that it was you until just now." The elevator arrived. Neither of us got on it right away. "How's law?" I asked, mostly to say something. "I'm not practicing litigation anymore. Compliance work, mostly. It's less exciting than my mother hoped, probably," she said, with something almost like a laugh, though it didn't quite reach all the way. We stood there a moment too long, the elevator doors closing without either of us stepping in. "It was good seeing you, Ethan," she said finally. "You too." I didn't expect to hear from her again. For 2 weeks, I didn't. Then an email arrived, professional on the surface, addressed to both me and Trevor, asking a few clarifying questions about our proposal's implementation timeline. Buried at the bottom, almost as an afterthought, was a single line. "Would be good to catch up sometime, if you're open to it. No pressure either way." I sat with that message for longer than I probably needed to. I told Marcus about it over dinner that week. He still lived 2 exits away, still the same steady presence he'd always been. "You don't owe her anything," he said. "But you also don't have to be scared of her anymore. That's different than owing her something." That distinction mattered more than I expected it to. I wrote back 3 days later. "Sure. Coffee sometime if you want." No agenda. We met at a place in Sylvan Park, not the coffee shop near Vanderbilt where we'd first met, somewhere new, neutral ground. She got there before me, already sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees, having apparently guessed I still took mine black. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," she admitted when I sat down. I wasn't sure either, honestly. We talked for almost 2 hours. Not about the dinner at first. We circled it the way you circle a bruise, testing how much pressure it can take before you touch it directly. She told me she'd broken off an engagement about a year after we ended, to a guy her mother had practically hand-selected, a resident at Vanderbilt. Exactly the kind of future her mother had described that night at the table. "He was fine," she said. "He was everything she wanted. I just kept comparing every conversation we had to conversations I used to have with you, and I couldn't figure out why, and eventually I stopped trying to." "Why are you telling me this?" She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, a habit I remembered from before. "Because I never actually said anything that night," she said. "At dinner. I let my mother say it, and I let my silence agree with her, and I've thought about that more than almost anything else I've ever done. I didn't say anything right away. Some old, protective part of me wanted to make her sit in that discomfort a little longer, the way I'd sat in it for months afterward. But mostly, I just felt tired of carrying it. "I used to think that was the worst part," I said. "Not what she said. What you didn't say. I know. I'm not looking for an apology tour," I told her, and I meant it. "I built a life I actually like. I'm not sitting around waiting for closure." "I can see that," she said, and there was something almost sad in the way she said it, like she was mourning a version of events where she'd said something different that night, 3 years ago, and gotten to keep whatever came after. We didn't fall back into anything. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to end this story with some grand romantic reunion, and that's not what happened. Not right away, maybe not ever in the way either of us once imagined. We had coffee twice more over the following month. Both times were careful, respectful, neither of us pretending 3 years hadn't happened. She told me about her work, about a case involving a supply chain fraud investigation she'd helped uncover, work she was clearly proud of in a way that had nothing to do with impressing anyone's parents. I told her about the business, about a young guy we'd just hired straight out of a technical program, reminding me of myself a few years back, the kind of hire that mattered more to me than any client contract. On the third coffee, almost 8 weeks after the hospital meeting, she asked the question I think we'd both been avoiding. "Do you think we'd have made it if that dinner had gone differently?" I thought about it honestly before answering, because she deserved that much. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe. But I think I needed to become someone who didn't need her approval, or yours, before I could have been good for anybody, including you." She nodded slowly. "That's fair. What about you?" "I think I needed to figure out whose life I was actually living," she said. "Mine, or the one my mother had already planned before I was born." The last time I saw Margaret Whitfield was almost 4 months after that hospital meeting, at a charity gala for the same hospital network. One Trevor's firm had been invited to as a vendor. I hadn't planned on going, but Trevor insisted it was good for business, and by then I wasn't afraid of rooms like that anymore. Margaret recognized me across the room before I recognized her. I watched something complicated cross her face. Surprise, maybe, or the specific discomfort of realizing a story she thought she'd already finished had kept going without her. She approached eventually, because women like Margaret Whitfield don't avoid uncomfortable conversations, they manage them. "Ethan," she said, "Elena mentioned you two had reconnected professionally." "We have," I said. "I run operations consulting for a firm doing some work with the hospital system." Something shifted behind her eyes, some quiet recalibration. "That's impressive," she said, and for once, it didn't sound like a word chosen to disguise its opposite. "Thank you for the compliment," I said. "But I didn't build any of this to impress you, Mrs. Whitfield. I built it because I wanted to know what I was capable of." She didn't have a response ready for that. For the first time since I'd known her, Margaret Whitfield looked almost unsure of herself. "I hope you and Elena are well," she said finally, and excused herself toward another conversation. I stood there for a moment, expecting to feel something bigger, vindication, maybe, or the satisfaction I might have imagined wanting 3 years earlier. Instead, I mostly just felt calm, the way you feel when a weight you'd carried so long you forgot it was there finally gets set down. Elena found me by the drink table a few minutes later. "She's going to ask me about you the whole ride home," she said, half smiling. "What are you going to tell her?" "That you turned out exactly the way I always thought you would." She just wasn't paying attention at the time. We stood there together for a while, not saying much, watching the room the way you watch something you're no longer trying to control the outcome of. "I'm not asking for anything," I told her eventually. "I want you to know that. I'm not trying to prove anything to your mother, or to you, or to the version of me that walked out of that house 3 years ago." "I know," she said. "I think that's actually the difference. Before, everything felt like it was about proving something. Now it just feels like, I don't know, like it could just be what it is." I didn't answer that right away. Some things don't need answering the same night they're said. We didn't get married in some rushed, dramatic way that would have made a tidier ending. It's been almost a year since that gala. We see each other, slowly, carefully, the way two people rebuild something they both know could break again if they rush it. I still run my part of the business with Trevor, which now has 4 full-time employees and a growing list of regional clients. Elena still works compliance for the hospital network, still calls her mother every Sunday at 4, though I notice she sounds less formal by the end of those calls now than she used to. I drove past that brick house in Belmead a few weeks ago, the one with the dinner table where all of this started. I didn't slow down. I didn't need to. Some nights I still think about that dinner. Not the words Margaret Whitfield used, not even really the silence that followed them, but the ordinary, unremarkable moment right before I stood up from that table. The last bite of chicken I never finished. The napkin I folded into a neat rectangle out of habit, because my mother raised me to leave a place better than the mess I found it in, even a place that had just quietly told me I didn't belong. I think that's the part people miss when they imagine stories like this ending in some big, satisfying reversal. The mother eating her words, the daughter finally choosing him, some grand public reckoning. Real endings are quieter than that. They look like a folded napkin, a drive home with the radio off, a slow, unglamorous decade of becoming someone, one ordinary Tuesday at a time, until the life you built on your own terms turns out to be enough, not because anyone else finally approved of it, but because you stopped needing them to.